Um, it's my privilege today, my honor today, to be introducing Bill Waddell, who is a member of St. James and a long-time United Methodist. I've known Bill for a long time. I was privileged and honored to have his middle daughter for 4 years at Central. Can't think of a better person in all of my years teaching is Grace Waddell. And to have gotten to know her father over time has been wonderful. And now I've gotten to know his eldest daughter, who is in process to be an ordained deacon, hopefully next year. But Bill is, like I said, out of St. James. He is the lawyer for the Council of Bishops. He used to, years ago, was 92 to 2009, was the lawyer for the Arkansas Annual Conference. And so he's got a wealth of knowledge on United Methodism and the Book of Discipline, and on the issue he's presenting today, same-sex issues. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Bill Waddell.
Thank you, Adam. And I've said this to Adam and George. You all have impeccable timing, right? I mean, what church can have something scheduled that's right on par with the Supreme Court? In fact, I laughed when it came out on Friday because I was thinking, that's amazing, you know? that is amazing. Well, also, let me just say that, of course, I know a lot of you in here from different things, from work and from church, and over the years, being in different things with you. And you've got a wonderful church, but what I want to emphasize for just a minute is you've got the perfect pastoral leadership for this time in the life of the United Methodist Church. I hope you feel that. When Betsy was at Pulaski Heights, we started St. James and Emmanuel Baptist Church and Pulaski Heights started a ministry to the Highland Court Housing Project, which has been torn down, but it was a terrible place. And so Betsy gave leadership from Pulaski Heights, and it was a wonderful ministry. So we've worked together on those kind of things. So, you know, Betsy, of course, has got this legacy of ministering to all, but with this heart for marginalized people. And I say that not because it's a negative towards somebody's marginalized, but it's just an affirmation that everyone is a person of sacred worth. And that's what we believe as United Methodist. And going around the denomination doing legal work for them, I still do have a practice, and our accounting manager, Cindy Blythe, is here. And of course, you do see me occasionally, right? You can verify that I'm there sometimes. Yeah.
I like working.
Okay. But I do practice law at the Friday firm, but at the same time, this has become more and more a lot of what I do, and it's been interesting to see what our denomination looks like. And I was in May, I was in Berlin for this express purpose of trying to address a path that the Council of Bishops could approach the same gender issue. And you'll see we made incremental progress, but there was and I'm gonna be candid today, so if you ask me a question, I'm gonna be as candid as I can. But I was very disappointed that we were not able to make more progress. And I say that with all respect for the tough position that the bishops are in. You know, they're like our candidates for president and everything else. They're running again to be assigned somewhere every 4 years. And so our general conference is set up the same way that their assignments are. I wish we could do it in off years, like every 2 years. Vic, you understand the every 2-year thing, don't you? But to get off of a cycle of where the biggest legislative issues and the biggest issues in the church are not the same time that they are going to get reassigned. Because if they're going to be reassigned, and this makes sense to you, I'm sure, some conferences say, we don't want you if you take this position or that position. And so that's affecting what happens at the Council of Bishops. Also in the audience, as you all know, Robin Wynn, but Robin and I worked together from about somewhere in the early 90s until he decided to become a judge, and he couldn't do it anymore. But Robin's been a good friend about a lot of issues in the church, and appreciate your progressive attitudes, Robin, and your friendship as well. Well, I said you have impeccable timing, you've got the right leadership, and I do thank you, Adam, for all the kind of things you said about my family. It is my oldest daughter, Jessie, who's at Christ UMC in Memphis, and that is a conservative church, in case you know, who she's gotten in a little bit of trouble for posting on Facebook, and Adam and I have both counseled her. I've learned today, and thank you for that more than anything, is that she needs to be careful on Facebook until she's ordained, and then she can do it. Adam is very pragmatic. You know, notice that. But one reason I said tell you that, Jessie felt like that she was called to be in ministry a long time ago, and a lot of it started. She used to go with me to Highland Court, and so Betsy knew Jessie when she was young, elementary, 6-7-year-old, but she got into going to Mexico, and it was there that she developed this call for ministry, and it's related to mission, and particularly little children. And so she went to Ouachita Baptist thinking that she would get this biblical basis, and she did, but they also told her that she couldn't be called to be in ministry. And so she felt the call strong enough to move past that, and ended up going to seminary, and has been out several years now. So, one of the things we recognize at my age, 58, is that the next generation feels differently about some of these things. So as we sit here today, where we find ourselves is that the law allows something that our church prohibits. And so we're in an interesting time. And I don't know if you all listened to the NPR's morning edition on Saturday, but yesterday they interviewed the Dean, Gary Hall of Washington National Cathedral. And so it was talking about Lincoln's second inaugural address. So we're almost at the end of the Civil War. We've had a huge split. Is this sounding familiar in the church? We've had a huge split. And what he says in that is really significant, because he points out that both sides read the same Bible and pray to the same God and invoke God's aid in support of them against the other. It's really interesting parallel to where we are in the United Methodist Church, and we are strongly divided. I do not believe there will be a major split. I think there will be churches that leave if our position changes on this, and there are some prominent ones that are threatening, but the difference of opinion is real. And Adam mentioned to me something about an African student that he's become aware of, but I can tell you from talking to the bishops from Africa, and I meet with them twice a year individually and in the group, but one bishop said, if I have to go back and say that the church has changed its position and say we're going to follow it, they will cut off my left hand. So they're being real scriptural, where it says if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. And so what we've got in the United Methodist Church across the world, and even within, I would say, Arkansas, right, is this spectrum of people who genuinely believe what they believe, and we respect that. That's one of the great things about the United Methodist Church. At the same time, we're now in a position where this could be something that changes with generations. And Jessie and others tend to tell me all the time that I'm not really with it on these issues, and I have to kind of stop and think. And so I say all that kind of by way of introduction. What I'm going to do is give you an update, and there may be slides that I just click through and we don't spend much time on, but I want to tell you what's going on within the United Methodist Church. And some people have seen different versions of this because we're doing this a lot of different places in a lot of different states. If you notice the term, the discipline uses the term homosexual. We have same sex in a lot of our wording, but the one update is that there's a concentrated effort to talk about same gender, and so that's what you'll see in some of this. So one of the things that I've been surprised at is the theology that's coming out of different things. One of the things I've been tasked with doing is meeting with Good News, which is a moderate but conservative oriented group, and with Reconciling Ministries to try and find a solution. So this first quote up here is a board member of Good News. He told me I could use his quote, but I can't use his name. But he said, "I'd rather tell my grandson that the United Methodist Church split over a debate about who Jesus Christ is than over same gender issues," which is a perspective statement. That's interesting. This is sex and same gender issues and things like that are not who we are as people. It's not everything we are, is what I just say. It's not everything who we are as people. It's also not everything about our faith, right? So there's about 10 times more than that, more than 10 times more references to money problems and sin in the scripture than there is to sexual issues, and particularly the 4 or 5 verses related to same gender. And I just say that because it tells you a perspective of Good News. We came close to finding an agreed way, but it's kind of fallen apart with the politics of General Conference coming up. As you know, General Conference is in 2016. I alluded to that a minute ago. I assume sometimes people know more about all this, but we just elected delegates. We elected a pretty moderate group of delegates compared to others. In some places, there's one conference in particular, they elected 23 of 28 people who were on a slate of a conservative group. So we know where that's going to go. And then this, since I've told you so much about my daughter, this I'll just have to confess, this is a pastor at Christ UMC. So Maxie Dunham started this church, and Maxie Dunham, but he was preaching recently, about 2 months ago, and I happened to be there, and I couldn't help but write this quote down. It says, "Since we are all made in the image of God," Genesis 1, "the more diverse we are as a church, the more clearly we can see who God is." Now, that was an amazing thing. It gave me chills to listen to this person. This person is also from Asbury. He was trained at Asbury Seminary. And we are guilty, all of us, of saying, "Oh, you went to this seminary, you went to that seminary, you must be this, you must be that." But that is not true. And the spiritual issues that are involved in this pervade and surpass some of the things that we want to focus on in the same gender issue. And so one thing I want to offer you, Sunday schools are always looking for something to do. This book by Christine Pohl, P-O-H-L, called Living in the Community, it talks about 4 practices that congregations and Christian groups can live into. And it starts out with living and experiencing grace, promise keeping, truth speaking, and extending and receiving hospitality. Those are the 4 things. She is an Asbury professor. This is really good. If you all want to think about how you want to live into faith, it's scripturally based, and I would recommend that you all consider doing that. We're in a tough time right now where the polls have moved further apart as a result of last Friday. So thinking about those kinds of things, let's look at some of the parts of the Book of Discipline. I realize this is a little small for you, but I want to just hit a few things so you can see The Book of Discipline, is our church law. It's a law book. It used to be really thin, and somebody's given me these going back, ones in the 1800s, but they're really thin, and it's now gotten to be like this, small print, and we've gotten very legalistic as a denomination. We have a church process, law process, where a complaint can be filed. It goes through a process, has something like a grand jury called a committee on investigation. We have trial courts with juries, and we have an appellate court, intermediate, and we have a Supreme Court called the Judicial Council. And so our law is, a lot of what our discussion is on this 161F. And I know you can't see it, let me just read quickly. We affirm that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of this sacred gift. And then beginning in the 1970s, we began putting in language that was anti-same gender. So although all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, sexual relations are affirmed only within the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. And then we have this kind of dichotomy on down in there. We affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. That makes this quote look interesting, right? This is what the Book of Discipline says. Since we are made in the image of God, the more diverse we are, the more clearly we see who God is. But we affirm all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this incompatible with Christian teaching. So just a bookmark here. We'll look at this later. But a lot of annual conferences voted by resolution to remove this incompatibility this year. We didn't get to vote on it in Arkansas. One pastor moved to table the vote or the consideration of the resolution indefinitely, and it passed. So back to my daughter. I wasn't there. Were you there? Were you there, Betsy? But my daughter, I'm telling her to lay low. She stands up and talks in favor of the resolution, which shows that they never listen to their father, right? But it also shows that we learn so much from our kids when they're acting out of their own heart and their conscience as to what they should do. But we didn't get to vote on this, and what you're going to see when we look at resolutions after a while is that most people are moving towards trying to remove this. Others, there's a few in the southeastern jurisdiction are going the other way. And so we continue with this kind of schizophrenic thing about our theology. People are sacred worth, but it's incompatible to be homosexual. That's what we're saying. We affirm that God's grace is available to all. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry for and with all persons. So, you can see that that's a tough thing to live into if you're a pastor. What do I do? I do this, but I cannot do this. And so I thought Bishop Mueller, in his letter that went out, capsuled what he thinks, and that is the only thing you cannot do is say the wedding vows as a pastor or sign the marriage certificate, but you can do other things. I have to be careful at every audience. Somebody's related to somebody, so I have to be careful what I say. But there are people that have asked, can a complaint be filed against a pastor for being the maid of honor in a wedding? Okay, that's true. That's really true. And there are people in here who probably know exactly who that was. But the reason I say all of this is that this is the core of what the dispute is right now, and almost all the bishops, almost all, are trying to find a way around all this. And so just resolutions, mediation, trying to reach a mediated agreement is what's happening. And I do those as well. I just did one in Nashville last week. We also have pastors are prohibited from celebrating homosexual unions, and they are not to be conducted in our churches. We're not going to spend time on this today because there's too many other important things. But this is the basis of the charges that are being filed against pastors, and this applies to pastors. It does not apply to lay people. Okay, so you could, if you had authority to marry people, you can do that, and there's no charge against lay people for this. You put Betsy.
Which is not fair. I spent 4 years of my life preparing people for marriage. It's not fair.
You put Betsy in an awkward position if you go around her and you allow a ceremony in your church. But in a lot of parts of the United States, they're going around the pastor and they're saying, "So I'm the chair of the trustees. I'd love for you to say I can't be chair of the trustees. I've been wanting to give that to Bo for a long time." You know, that kind of thing. So this is where that is, and you know, different churches have different views. I've spoken to a lot of churches that are predominantly conservative in their views, and I view y'all as moderate to progressive, but you know, there's a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, that are moderate about this issue. They're not like wanting to just hate people over it, but they're not totally there on some of the issues. And so, you know, that's probably more where I am, to be honest, on a personal basis. But when you look at this, this right here is not changed, of course, by the decision on Friday. The Supreme Court cannot change our church law, and we'll look at that in just a minute. The other thing that you may not realize is a lot of people care about theology, but in the church they actually care more about money, right? I mean, that was rhetorical, but some of y'all got it. We have this provision, 806.9, that says we cannot spend funds to promote the acceptance of homosexuality or to violate the express commitment of the church not to reject or condemn. Again, kind of an odd thing to apply, but our General Council on Finance and Administration, which is GCFA, voted last year, or 2 years ago, to start extending benefits to same-gender partners. So the reason that I did the mediation on a couple of Wednesdays ago was a person had gotten married who works for one of the general agencies because his partner didn't have 15 years, did not have any insurance. And Tennessee, the way they've done the health exchange and the private option type thing related to the Affordable Care Act is different. And so this person could not get insurance. He tried through the federal exchange, and I don't know why that didn't work out, but a pastor married him and his partner, and they worked for a general agency. Our Judicial Council has said that this is okay to extend those benefits. And this is, we think of our Judicial Council right now as pretty conservative, but this is an interesting thing. So what the bottom line is on this decision is if there's discretion to do something, the Judicial Council says we're not going to upset that discretion. We're going to let that agency, that church, do what it thinks is right. We're not going to micromanage that. And so Robin could tell you that's kind of a doctrine that a lot of courts and judicial bodies adopt. We would say it's abuse of discretion. If you have discretion, we're just going to see that you abuse it, but otherwise we let you do what you want to do. And so that's what that is. And then you all know we had the Frank Schaefer case. Are y'all familiar with the Frank Schaefer? His son, he found out his son was homosexual, and the way he found out was a parent of somebody that knew his son called and said, "My son says your son's about to commit suicide." So he found out about that, and he went to Boston where it was legal to have same-gender marriage, and Frank did, and he married his son, his partner. And very interesting, he kept it quiet, but he told his district superintendent and the bishop. So a group decided to charge him, and we have a 6-year statute of limitations in the United Methodist Church on complaints. They waited until 1 month before the 6 years expired. So the wedding had occurred, almost 6 years earlier, and nobody had said anything. But this is typical of us in the church. It's probably not Baptist to do this, but the choir director and the organist were of different persuasions on this issue of same gender. They got into a dispute over music. It wouldn't have anything to do. And so the choir director, the organist's son, actually filed a complaint against Frank Schaefer. So, I laugh about that to myself because I'm thinking the real spiritual problem is, why can't the choir director and the organist get along? Do y'all have that, Betsy? Okay. So one of the reasons I tell you that is, isn't it funny what human behavior is like? And so this went to a trial, and we've had several high-profile trials. The Amy DeLong trial in Wisconsin, and then this one in Eastern Pennsylvania. And what I do when we have a trial is I go and act as the law clerk to the judge, Robin. So I sit there to advise them on the church law. It's not a really exciting thing, but we're trying to get it right. And in this case, they said they ended up reversing it at the appeal stage, and then it was affirmed, that reversal was affirmed. And of course, he was immediately allowed to move to the Western jurisdiction and to Bishop Minerva Carcaño's conference, and he has a church out there.
Well, he couldn't get an appointment though back. He couldn't get an appointment at other places.
Yeah, Eastern Pennsylvania is an interesting thing. Even though it's Pennsylvania, it's very conservative in the eastern part of the state, except for Philadelphia. And so they have a strong confessing movement chapter there, and no one wanted him. I mean, I say that's not fair. No, it's not no one, but it was going to be hard to find an appointment for him. So I'm not going to spend time on this, but if you want this, Adam has got it and George has got this. You can look at these. There's a lot of questions that as a lawyer that I have come up with about 341.6. That's the one that says our pastors can't conduct and they can't be in our churches. There's a lot of questions about that we need to have our judicial council rule on, and it's very difficult to get that done. All these questions were before one annual conference this year, and while I was at our annual conference, I was on the phone talking to them. They were trying to decide whether to let this happen, and they ultimately said no, and the reason they said no was because they're afraid of what the Judicial Council, our Supreme Court, would say. But one of the things I just point out, the first one is a pretty important question for us. It says, does 341.6 add a standard or rule of doctrine that was not included in the Articles of Religion in violation of paragraph 17? I know that's real legalistic, but let me tell you why that's important. In the United Methodist Church, we are the result of mergers with different denominations and predecessors. But what we have is a doctrine that says you can't add any doctrine that was not in our Articles of Religion. Okay, so homosexuality, same-gender issues were not in our Articles of Religion. But 341.6 adds doctrine on this issue, okay? And so everybody's afraid to ask the Judicial Council. But Robin, my philosophy is you ask the hard questions of judges and let them struggle with it, right? That's why y'all earn the big bucks. I'm picking on Robin, but it's my only chance. Usually he's the boss.
I'm taking notes.
Okay. But it shows you what kind of person Robin is that I can do this too. I'll lay off of you. I'll move over to somebody else now. But so there is no doctrine about same gender issues in our articles of religion. The other doctrine that we have is you can't change the articles of religion. Okay? So you know the joke about United Methodist is that we have 6 commandments and 4 suggestions. Have you heard that? Have you ever heard that joke before? And really what that's getting at is just like jokes about Baptist and Church of Christ and there's a little bit of grain of truth in this. And one of the things about the articles of religion is they're focused on who Jesus Christ is, who we are in relation to Jesus Christ. They're focused on core issues that are similar to all other denominations, but we don't get out into these more what I call like Pharisaical, Pharisee type things. And so we let our churches kind of move in different directions on these things. And so there's other questions. I don't want to spend time on it, but I want to show you kind of where the church is and where they're willing to go. So the Council of Bishops have done this incremental recommendation. They're going to recommend to General Conference that we define what conducting a ceremony is and what celebrate means. And so, Betsy, you can be a maid of honor in a wedding, okay?
I've always wanted to do that.
So it says, here's 341.6 in white. The bishops have agreed for purposes of this paragraph and 2702, which is the chargeable offenses. Conduct and celebrate shall mean speaking wedding vows, declaring in a ceremony that persons are married, or seeking a declaration from the persons that they intend to marry, or signing a marriage certificate. So I've already told you that's what we think you can do anyway, but in some jurisdictions, one in particular, you do anything. I noticed in Bishop Muller's deal, he said, was it he that said standing up at a wedding? Or was it there's some bishop that on Friday said you shouldn't stand up at a wedding. I don't know, that may not be Bishop Muller. I don't want to
He
treat
actually even said a meditation.
Yeah. Homily.
He didn't use the word homily, but I was like, meditation sounds really close to me.
He's very open, and he's doing some good things, thinking through this. I just mentioned to you that this will change what is allowed and not allowed. Okay, this will make it clear on those things. So this is where you can do something. I've been talking about this. I've tried to get various groups in the church to submit a petition. You all, anybody who's a member of a local church or your church as a whole can submit a petition to General Conference. I think the deadline is sometime in October. It's on, if you go to the umc.org website, General Conference, you'll be able to see what you have to do. But I have been proposing for a long time, and some of those, like you've seen a version of this at MFSA meeting, but because the law is that you can do this now, particularly we ought to have in our law that the pastors get to determine whether they will do it. So one of the things that we're seeing, we're a worldwide denomination, so we cannot draft something that is mandatory to do anything. The African situation is a perfect example. But there are a lot of pastors who say, I don't want to marry divorced people. That's a scriptural kind of interpretation as well. So what we were trying to do, this is not the result of just my work, but working with Good News and reconciling and other people, was to try and come up with something that allowed us to move in between these two positions and let people who are pastors do what they feel God's calling them to do in that situation. Not saying anything's mandatory, but also it's not prohibited. My view and others' view is that if we can get to this point, and move in between, then we'll be able to avoid this split. I don't think people will split over this. Although I was told in Berlin in the Council of Bishops meeting, in this executive session where it's just the bishops, so they can speak freely their mind, that if this is adopted, it will split the church. I personally don't believe that. That's not consistent with where I think the church is.
Bill, do you think in light of the Supreme Court ruling this week that I mean, I don't see how it seems to give weight to the opportunity to use this language. I mean, what you said, I mean, I'll be real honest. I've had questions. I have never turned down a couple. There's been one or two. I really wish I had turned them down rather than marrying them. But there are other gay couples that I have met and know who I would gladly do their wedding if it were legal because of their long-time commitment, much longer, in fact, longer than any marriage I've had. So I mean, to me, it's kind of really not, it's on the basis of whether the couple is, you know, prepared for marriage and spiritually prepared. I'm not talking about legally, spiritually prepared for marriage.
But and if you've studied the Book of Discipline, any paragraph 340 has some strong language about what pastors should consider when they're determining who to marry, and they have discretion already, but they have a new doctrine since the 80s on this one that says you cannot marry these people. So my view is, yes, it's probably helped by Friday's decision. You know, this is not unique. The reason this is drafted as it is, though, is it takes out, hopefully, the fighting words that are in some of the other proposals. We have a group that involves representatives of all agencies called the Connectional Table, and they met in Africa strategically, and they did it to propose, in part, something similar to this, called a local option type provision.
Bill, does that, in the Articles of Religion number 22, that has to do with local churches not having to do exactly what the other churches do, is that kind of falling into that thinking?
Yeah, in fact, the earlier version of this had Article 22 at the preface of it, but I ended up taking it out after the MFSA meeting for this reason. There are historians in the church who say that the history of our church is that this does not mean what it says. Yeah. And I didn't want to fight over the Article of Religion meaning what it said, but Article 22 says it's not necessary that rites and ceremonies should in all places be the same or exactly alike, for they have always been different and may be changed according to the diversity of countries, that's Africa, and times, and men's manners, so that nothing be ordained against God's word. So the limitation on the ceremony is it ordained against God's word? So this is where if you have the local option, some pastors are going to say, I'm going to stand on those verses, about sex and about homosexuality in the scripture, and so I'm not going to do it. But others may say, I find in God's word something else. So without having to decide that issue, it caused a split in the denomination, which is really where I'm coming from. This seems to give some support to that, and we could spend a lot of time, but we're kind of short, so I'm going to keep moving. But the last sentence says every particular church may ordain, change, or abolish rites and ceremonies so that all things may be done to edification. So think about what does that mean? And I've looked up this in history of the church. I've looked at judicial council decisions, and this is where we've had a strong disagreement with some of the historians. And the historians who disagree happen to be the ones that are very conservative. But to me, if we can't change this, the historians say this every particular church does not mean like every jurisdiction, every local church. It means the denomination. They say church there is limited to the United Methodist denomination. Well, it doesn't seem to make much sense to me if you read it that way. But this was in the Anglican Church Articles of Religion. That, just so you know, it's not, Wesley didn't just draft it. So it's a real interesting thing from a legal standpoint to kind of think through it. But I mean, I usually kid the pastors, so like I'll kid Adam. Adam, did you ever focus on Article 22? Okay, thank you. What I love is when one pastor starts, yeah, I did, and then you ask them what it is before you put it up here, and nobody knows what it is. nobody knows what Article 22 is, except maybe somebody who's been looking at it for some reason. But we can't change the Articles of Religion. At 341.6 is a doctrine. It's even characterized as a doctrine by everybody. And how do you mesh all this together? I want the Judicial Council to wrestle with that and come up with a decision. I think that's important for us. This is really deep in the weeds, but hopefully it makes sense to you about why this is important. This is who we are. This is our DNA, the Articles of Religion. All right, so in interest of time, and y'all are really good about letting me get through this. I want to entertain questions at the end, but we can hand out the resolutions. I've summarized for you resolutions from around the denomination, and we may not have enough, but maybe y'all could share. Some of you could share with. We have about 50 copies, but. The annual conference, I've already told you, we tabled indefinitely this resolution to remove that incompatibility language, and then did not vote on a petition to modify 341.6. I did not want that to come up, but it came up. It was the change that I was suggesting back here. This is what was before the conference. I asked that it not be because we didn't have people ready to talk about it, and I was out of town the day it came. I was in Nashville, so it was not a good thing. But that's what we did, and then what you got before you are a summary of what the annual conferences have done around the United States. There's some surprises in here. There's some actual surprises where it looks like people are focused less on the issue and more on ministry. And that always warms my heart about this because, you know, sometimes I start out with this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you now. For me, kind of my base spirituality and my base faith is centered on Romans 8:38-39. Some of you may know that, but Paul asked the question, what can separate us from the love of God? And he lists all those things. And then he concludes and says, nothing can separate us from the love of Jesus Christ. So that's important to me, and it can be emotional to me because that's how I know it's core to me. And it was, for me, it was really important my whole life. I don't know who first told me that in Sunday school in West Helena United Methodist Church, but it was a wonderful thing that it was a memory verse. I used to could say it all those things that he asked, can they separate us? But the reason I tell you that is that for me, when I look at a resolution in a different annual conference and I see somebody talking first about trying to reach other people and to love other people and to show them the love of Jesus Christ, that resonates with me. I can get just as offended by people being polar opposites on both sides of this issue when they seem to not care what the soul of a person, how it's affected. And that may be why I call myself moderate. Okay, but now I'm transparent. So the other thing though that bothers me, and kind of this is more as a lawyer, but in Isaiah 42, I think it is, verses, it's towards the front, 2 through 4, but he talks about the Lord coming and not breaking any, what's the word? I'm trying, Betsy, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but he will not break a bruised reed, and he will not snuff out a smoldering wick. And so I think about people on both sides of this issue who are bruised and hurt, and there's a lot of harm all the way around on this. And we're putting harm recognition in every just resolution agreement we're doing. And those people who have just that little bit of spark of faith, and I don't want what we do on an issue to break that bruised reed or to snuff out that spark of faith. So I get energized. I've preached for you now. I get energized by this. So look at the very first one here, the Alabama West Florida Conference. This is where Fraser Memorial is. It's a huge church. It's very conservative. It's one that's threatening to leave the denomination. And they not only adopt a resolution that says, stay where you are, church, but we're instructing our delegates that we're about to elect that you have to hold the line. All right? That's one. And then you get some of them like Baltimore, Washington, where they ask that the incompatibility language be taken out. And East Ohio is kind of an interesting place, but they had some things that were not supported, and the two on same gender issues were not supported. So we think everything north of a certain line would be one way. That's not how it is in the denomination. We saw Alabama, West Florida. Look on the second page at North Alabama. This is one that kind of warms my heart, kind of goes to there. This is the bishop for North Alabama is, and this is Birmingham and North, is Debbie Wallace-Paget. She is the chairperson or president of the Committee on the Status and Role of Women. She's Asbury trained, and she is relatively conservative. She was asked by the Council of Bishops to file a complaint against Bishop Talbert, who performed a same-gender ceremony in Birmingham. So if you know all that, this is who Debbie Wallace-Paget is. Hers is all about talking and affirming people's sacred worth and against bullying and things like that. This is a tremendous step for that conference. It's incremental, but it's remarkable that they chose not to talk about positions, but about the interest of ministry. Okay, does that difference show up there? Look at you can see some of the different things, but some of the annual conferences have huge votes in favor of these resolutions to change where we are as a United Methodist denomination. In Northern Illinois Conference, which is Chicago and parts of Wisconsin, they have 90% votes in favor of changing the Book of Discipline and all these things. And so, by contrast, we didn't get to vote. Now, I'm not negative on our bishop for us not getting to vote. We as a conference would like to have voted, and there was one procedural vote that I think got 60% to change the rules as to how this second resolution was approved. But the bishop had the will of the body to tell him whether we're going to vote or not. That bothers me, but there are some good ideas in here about how we might change for next year to get some things done. So, lastly, quickly, the United States Supreme Court decision. nobody's ever asked me what I think about a U.S. Supreme Court decision until Friday. And I got calls from the liberals and the conservatives saying, tell us what this means, because our pastors want to act on it. You know, some wanted to begin doing ceremonies, some wanted to file complaints. So, you know, I'm not important. I'm not. I know I'm not. But it felt interesting with all this background that I've shared with you today to be asked what this means. And of course, everybody who's interpreted it agrees with this. It's a no-brainer that it doesn't affect our church. It just sets us up in contrast to the secular world. And so it reminds you, you know, of where we were on race, where we split over race. It reminds you where we were over ordination of women. And, you know, on the race, we followed the secular law. In the area of women, you know, we were not like right out front, but we're kind of known as a leader in that. And but I thought these were some things that people, I haven't seen this on Facebook or in the media, but I thought these were interesting perspectives from the opinion. The first is the nature of injustice is that we may not always see it in our own times. And that interview of Gary Hall, the Dean of the National Cathedral, yesterday on NPR was real interesting, because at the very end, Scott Simon is asking him questions, and he said, you know, I think we need to be careful about saying what's God's will today. You know, we just got the opinion. The issue's been debated. God's will sometimes works its way out in God's way, and we don't always know how to view that and interpret that. And one of the things I love about Leslie Weatherhead's book on the will of God, that little short book, is that you know, he talks about God's intentional will for our lives, his circumstantial will. So we're in a circumstance, God's intentional will might be defeated for a time, but what's God's will in that circumstance? And then what's God's ultimate will? And you know, God's ultimate will is for us to be one with God, you know, to know God as God truly is, to know ourselves as who we truly are, and to be in relation to God, be one with God. And in that context, that's taking me a lifetime. Some of you all may have it already figured out. I'm kidding, obviously. But it's taking me a lifetime, and I'm finding out things about myself that I'm blind to. And one of them is this issue. I'm trying to work through it. But this is a truism that really applies, I think, to us as Christians today. And it certainly applies to us in the church. Why do we think that we can say today what God's will is in this circumstance without working through that together? I'm glad I'm in the United Methodist Church with people like you all trying to work through that. And I don't want us to split. I want to hear all points of view and us to stay together. I like this one too. You know, Patty and I met in the nursery at West Helena United Methodist Church. I've known her, she's 57, I'm 58. I've known her a long time. I used to say she looked good in a diaper, but as we get older, that doesn't sound good. Cindy, don't out me, Cindy. Don't out me, okay? I'd say it again though. So, but I like this. The nature of marriage is that though through its enduring bond, two persons together can find other freedoms such as expression, intimacy, and spirituality. This is true for all persons, whatever their sexual orientation. But you know, Justice Kennedy saying this about what marriage is really a good thing, because marriage is not defined by sex, you know, and it demeans it to define it in that one dimension. And then this one about demeaning gays, etc. Just in the interest of time, let me move to this. there are two parts of it that talk about religious convictions. This is one of them. Can you all see this, or do I need to read it to you? Many who deem same-sex marriage to be wrong reach that conclusion based on decent and honorable religious or philosophical premises, and neither they nor their beliefs are disparaged here. Sounds like kind of we're going to let the church work it out. The churches work it out. But when that sincere personal opposition becomes enacted law and public policy, the necessary consequence is to put the imprimatur of the state itself on an exclusion that soon demeans or stigmatizes those whose own liberty is then denied. And then that's one. But this is the key paragraph for us as people of faith. And I think his opinion is well considered. You know, it's sound legally as well. But this shows a perception by him, which I think is very helpful. It takes a lot of air out of what we're seeing. People who didn't read the opinion, but had their opinion ready when it came out. You know, that happens a lot. Finally, it must be emphasized that religions and those who adhere to religious doctrines may continue to advocate with utmost sincere conviction that by divine precepts, same-sex marriage should not be condoned. So we still are in that place in the United Methodist Church. No one's going to say that anybody in this room has to be one way or another in their belief. But what's clear is that we have separation of church and state, and we've got a free exercise clause in the First Amendment. The First Amendment ensures that religious organizations and persons are given proper protection as they seek to teach the principles that are so fulfilling and so central to their lives and faith, and to their own deep aspirations to continue the family structure they've long revered. I don't know how you feel about certain politicians, but I actually was somewhat relieved to see our governor's response. It was moderate, you know, and I appreciated that. I thought it might be difficult, but I think where we are is that we're back where we were right before the decision. So as a church, the next steps are, what are we going to do? That's why I mentioned this book, Betsy, since you weren't in here, this Christine Pohl book about living in the community. I think it's really important for us to say intentionally, where are we going to go as a church? Not with just this issue in mind, but with our whole calling, and how are we going to create a community of all different beliefs on one issue, but a common belief on about who Jesus Christ is, how important the grace of Jesus Christ is to us in today's society, and to show people who differ from us who God is in a way that's positive, compelling, and draws them to Christ. That, to me, is a worthwhile thing to do in this circumstance that we find ourselves in. All right, so I'm going to stop, and I've left you, 5 minutes for questions? Yes, Bob?
Bill, in Berlin, do you sense any softening at all in the Central Conference's representation? You mentioned the African.
Personally, yes. The Central Conference's bishops are softening, but they are in a very difficult position.
Yeah.
So you feel awkward even pushing them to make a decision towards a local option. Local option seems like it's not a threat in Africa. It seems that way, but it's perceived as, you know how this works, it's perceived as a movement towards something, as opposed to staying where it is. And you all may know this, you may not know this, but between the southeastern jurisdiction of the church and Africa, with some people from the Philippines, the language in the Book of Discipline will not change if people vote along those lines, those party lines. And we have in the South Central jurisdiction where we are, there are a number of conservative delegates as well. So it's, to me, it's going to take a spiritual work among the people to try and make make progress where we can live together. All right. Any other?
Yeah, this conflict, sexual conflict, I can remember back in about 1967, I was a member of the Southwest Texas Conference at that time, and a seminary classmate of mine finally declared himself as homosexual, and the conference ruled him out of the conference. And interesting enough, the clergy pretty well voted for him to stay, and the lay people voted him out. So that's how I got it. That goes way back to 67.
You worry about how does that person see the church, right, in those situations. Yes, sir.
I really appreciate what you're doing. I was Tom Matheny's pastor when he was head of the Judicial Council, and I know how difficult it must be to deal with large institutions and this kind of a spiritual conflict. But I also know that Trinity is going to continue to reach out to same-gender couples, and I hope we'll find a way, too, for our pastor to be involved in ways that do not compromise our ordination. And I think we're going to continue to be the kind of a church that helps our denomination discover what God's will is. We believe there's as much grace and love in United Methodist Church, ultimately, as there is in the United States Supreme Court.
For those who don't know who Tom Matheny was, he was on the Judicial Council and chaired our Supreme Court longer than I think anybody, and it was the best it's ever been in that time period, because he did it without moving to the left or to the right. He just followed the doctrine. So I'm trying to look at Bo. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Hold it close. Bill, I agree with your comment about the younger generation being more open, more accepting. What would you say is your guess of the average age of our delegates to the lay conference? And young is 56.
Well, Mark Norman is under. He's a pastor on 37. I'm thinking about who was elected.
Clergy or lay. We had numerous. Well, Pulaski Heights young people were very Miller Wilburn, Katie
He's a
Dunn.
freshman at UNC, and he was elected to jurisdictional. So
Yeah.
he's, the clergy delegation, Mark Norman's probably the youngest, and he's
Yeah.
my age, 40.
Yeah. That was
So
the first ballot, and Mark is African American. That was a great vote. I was really excited about that.
I know I saw on Facebook a lot of the younger delegates were really upset at how it ended up.
They're alternates to general, but they,
Yeah.
in varying degrees, some of them will go to general as an alternate. They're all jurisdictional delegates where we select bishops and do other business. Our lay slate,
It's more conservative.
yeah, it's older.
Well, and there's some people on there that have been on there a long time, and I was really personally sad to see that we didn't move off of some of that lay representation to some newer voices. But I was excited to see the younger people as alternates, and that was really strong.
It takes about 14 days of time to go do that. So, I mean, young people have a hard time taking off, right, to go do that.
Bill, since the Schaefer reinstatement, haven't there been some Methodist pastors who have married same-gender couples, and there's been no consequences?
Yeah.
And is it because the jurisdictional people are not forced with it, or they're not out headhunting?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. In the Western jurisdiction, there have been a number of ceremonies, and the bishops will not process the complaint. They'll dismiss the complaint. So they're nullifying the book of discipline.
Yeah.
And the next level and this is where I get involved a lot, is they're filing complaints against the bishops for dismissing the complaints.
Okay.
So we have a number of complaints against bishops in the Western. In the Northeastern, they have decided to go the just resolution route. So a complaint's filed, they get a mediator in there, someone like me who does this, and we go in and we work out a resolution. And those have all resulted in, I mean, not all, but virtually all, in 1 to 3 months suspension for the pastor. That's kind of the range there. In South Central, we haven't had much. We have 2 right now, just so you know.
Oh, really?
They're in Texas.
Okay.
And then in South Eastern, there are a few, and they're all in that early process right now. But in most of the Southeastern jurisdiction, the pastors know they would probably lose their credentials for good, completely defrocked, and so they're afraid.
Did you see the,
I think it was out of the Texas, somewhere in Texas, where they wanted to gerrymander out the Western jurisdiction. Did you see that resolution that's been proposed? They wanted to basically take the Western jurisdiction and absorb it into the other jurisdictions because they only had 5 bishops. What would your sense be about that, if that's a likelihood?
Yeah, the Western jurisdiction is really interesting. There are 5 bishops, and it's the smallest jurisdiction in terms of numbers of people, but the largest geographically. So like one bishop's got 4 states that she has to cover, and parts of 4 states. And they feel threatened by the denomination. I've not seen that actual proposal, so I don't know the details, but they have decided as a group to generally be only as faithful as required on this issue. Does that make sense? Only as faithful as required.
Just one point of Christian history that y'all may not know is that the church didn't start marrying people till real late. And I'll never forget in my worship class, my professor said, you know, you pastors really need to think through your theology of marriage, because the church didn't start marrying people until much later. It wasn't, you know, in the Catholic Church it's called a sacrament. We don't call it a sacrament, and for good reason, in my opinion. But the whole issue was about record keeping. Priests and monks were the only people who were literate, and they are the ones who got in charge of marrying people. So we don't really begin with a high theology of marriage. I think that ought to be kept in mind. We go around hearing how high and spiritual marriage is, but the church didn't start marrying people till much later. So really, it seems to me there's also room for a broadening of theology of marriage, because it obviously is not just about procreation from the United Methodist theological perspective, which it is in the Catholic.
In Europe, just so you know, you don't ever hear about a problem. They people are not married in the church by and large. They're married before the government officials. And if they do anything in the church, it's just in Germany. This is the exact situation. They do a blessing. But we can do that today here. So there is a way forward where you can be faithful to the book of discipline, and you can minister, and you can do all the things except the actual marriage ceremony. So, as I said, yeah, go ahead. I hope that's not my car. I tried to click on it.
I just wanted to ask about this petition that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What would we do to get started with that?
Yeah, George has a copy of it, and if you all, this is asking, what can you do with the petition? What first United Methodist is doing, and I think in Conway as well, is they're taking the petition. It's in a Word document. They're adding blanks, and anybody who wants to sign it can sign it, and then you send it to the General Conference. And that's a good way to express yourselves. I mean, there's nothing really controversial about a local option to me, you know. And so if you want to do that, this is kind of like, I feel a little bit passive aggressive in suggesting this, but wouldn't it be interesting if they had tens of thousands of petitions from lay people in the churches saying, this is what we want. You know, you may not ever deal with it, but we're telling you what we want. This is our vote for that. And, you know, I've not been in a legislative body to know how that plays out. I'm sure Vic got you've got probably a lot of people pushing you for certain issues as well. But in our denomination, because it's the way it's set up, we have that right as local people, local members, to do this. If you want to do it, you can do it. Nobody can stop you. They can't keep you from voting on it, those kind of things. Well, as I said when we first started, you all have impeccable timing. It's amazing that you all had this scheduled for today. George said he wanted to take credit for it, but I think Adam gets credit for it, right? And you have, as I said at the beginning, the pastoral leadership, and I think the lay leadership to minister very effectively in this time in the life of our denomination. So I congratulate you for where you are. Thank you for asking me to come, and appreciate you all paying attention and listening, and hopefully we'll move together forward, right?
Really appreciate your time. Okay, good turnout.
Hey, Steve. Steve.
Yeah, that is not a good thing either. So yeah, I would agree.
Are you still using that video player?
I can't put my turn on her. She doesn't need to pay her taxes. Tell George, you know, stick your foot up here, girl. You can't bend over it. Oh, good. Ask Betsy if they could put that Word document on the website, and any of us who wish to access it